Hey students, I hope everybody is doing okay. Today is September the 4th, 2020, the year of COVID. I do apologize for the right here, the glare. I figured out how to get rid of it, but I can't do it right now because I got to look at my notes. And it's my notes it's actually that creating what you're watching. What you're seeing is the glare of my notes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to find another way to look at my notes. Or maybe in a different color or something. You dim them so it won't look so bad. It really distracts me more than anything else. Today we're going to start with prehistory. Remember, we had finished up the duality of Mexican Americans and Marxism and La Rurista and all that above. So now we're going into a completely different uh, venue, I guess I would call it. And I don't know how long this lecture is going to be, as long as it needs to be. This is for Mexican American History 1, and we're going to be talking about prehistory from around 8,000 years before Common Era. In history, we use BCE, before Common Era. Common Era being after the birth of Christ, before Common Era prior to the birth of Christ. As we all know, time in the Gregorian calendar begins with the birth of Christ. Now, one of the things that is argued is that we used to think that the earliest humans inhabited Mexico and South America around 10,000 years ago, and now we are now beginning to believe that there may be 20,000 years ago. There was a body, skeletal remains of a female in a cenote, and her remains are approximately 20,000 years old. Okay, so now there is some speculation that maybe Amerindian tribes had made it through the Bering Strait down to Peru, Central America, and Mexico about 20,000 years, 23,000 years ago to be exact. Okay, now there were significant, large, complex civilizations that developed in Central America and southern Mexico, uh, and throughout Mesoamerica. Okay, it seems to me that the bulk of the thriving civilizations that we see are seen in the area of Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, the Petén, Yucatan, all the way up to the city of Mexico, the present day city of Mexico. And that's because of the temperate climate there that allows agriculture to flourish. The further north you go from Mexico City, the more arid the climate gets, so the tribes there were more scattered out. They were not as uh, in abundance as they were in southern Mexico and Central America. Now, all of these civilizations, okay, because they're different civilizations, it's not one civilization. All these civilizations rose and declined over a period of 10,000 years. Those that predate the 10,000 years that I'm talking about, or the 8,000 years before Common Era, or recorded time, we just don't have any record of them. That doesn't mean that they didn't thrive. That doesn't mean that they didn't do good. That just means that it's been so long, or they were around such a long time ago, that we just don't have the material to say uh, what they were, or if they were in the numbers of the Aztec or any like that. Now, all of these civilizations, as far back as 23,000 years before, 23,000 years ago, uh, and you know, prehistory, which is before the birth of Christ, they all had similar characteristics. There were certain things that they did, or that they all had significant settlements. There we do have traces of that. They had monumental structures, okay, like ball courts, temples, palaces, sacrificial altars, all of the above. Sometimes when a civilization would die out, another one will come back in and use it. And just kind of squat. And that's going to happen with the Aztec. And that's going to be the last of our lectures, okay? Societies were divided and followed royalty and nobility, okay? It was royalty, nobility. Royalty is you're born when you're born royal. Nobility is when you become like a really wealthy merchant can become part of the royalty, but he's not really royalty. He's a noble, like he's knighted. He wasn't born a prince or a, a duchess or anything like that. This individual kind of rose to nobility, and then you have the religious elite. Okay, you have the religious elite are very important because the religious elite keep the poor people under control and they cater to the wealthy people. And then you're going to have the political elite, okay? And those just rise out of nowhere. They usually what they become is that they become merchant elite or warrior elite, and then they become political elite, and then they acquire wealth and they can become nobility. Does everybody follow me? Or one of these really wealthy merchants can marry a princess and now they're part of the nobility. Is everybody with me? Good. I always say that. Uh, and then, of course, below the merchants, you had the commoners who had no status, right? They focus on agriculture. They're really the backbone of the society, but they're not given any status. Now, one of these really wealthy agriculture individuals can become a wealthy merchant, and from becoming a wealthy merchant, he may become a politician, okay? And after he becomes a politician, his kids can marry into nobility, and then there you go. So while the room for upward movement with these tribes was not real good, it didn't mean it didn't happen. Okay. Now what really was bad about being a commoner is that you were at the mercy of the religious elite and the nobility. Not so much the merchant elite, but you were at the mercy of the religious elite when sacrifice time came over, and the nobility whenever they wanted concubines or vassals or whatever it may be. They would transfer tribute to the lower elites. The way that it worked is that the commoners would transfer their wealth to the lower elite, and the lower elite would then give it to the political elite, the warriors, and the religious elite, and then the religious, the political, and the warriors would give it to the nobility, right? And then the nobility would allow it to trickle down again. That's why trickle down economics never works, right? Because they take the wealth away from the poor, they give it to the wealthy, and then the wealthy redistribute it, and they never get anything, right? It just doesn't work out that way, okay? They were primarily agricultural societies. They supplemented their agricultural foodstuffs with deer, turkeys, monkeys, rats, dogs, armadillos, javelinas, fish. There were no cows, no pigs, no horses, no pastoral animals, okay? There was no beasts of burden, okay, at all. Not until 1517 when they introduced the horse and the cow. But prior to that, and that's probably one of the reasons that they were so incredibly healthy, because all of the animals that I just named, monkeys, rats, dogs, armadillos, javelines, fish, and deer, are very low in fat and cholesterol. They supplemented their diets with a lot of green stuff like spirulina cakes, blue algae, tectacawil. I'm pretty sure tecuiclatral. There you go, tecuiclatral. I get them confused, right? The word zacate, zacate is a Nahua word, by the way. They had extensive trade networks. They traded, each civilization traded within a 200-mile radius, and then from that 200-mile radius, those people traded in another 200-mile radius. So if you multiplied this 5 times or 10 times, you could expand the sphere of trade 1,000 or 2,000 miles, and that's why they sometimes find things that used to belong to the Aztec or the Apache or the Comanche as far north as the Carolinas, and it's because of the trade networks that they had. These individuals were impervious to living conditions. They lived under really, really harsh conditions. There were no navigable rivers in Mexico. There isn't. Mexico was flooded, so they created a Chinampa system, and we'll talk about that later on. The terrain, whether it be northern Mexico, which is an arid desert, was pretty rough. If you were closer to the tropical forests, then you had jungles that had, panthers and all of the above, poisonous snakes, you name it. I mean, it was so. This difficult terrain impeded the movement of these people, and that's why they lived in such large areas of concentration. They were all concentrated in one area because that's where they were living. Yet they were still everywhere, and it's like that because they had pochos, okay, or pochtecas, okay. Those are people that would trade. They were always sending people out, warriors, traders. Their sphere of influence was going everywhere. Now you begin to see the settlement in northern Mexico in the southeastern United States, but come on. We just got done with a recent heat wave where the days were in the 100. Who the hell wants to come over here? In the next unit, when we talk about the Spaniards, the Spanish government could not pay people to come settle Texas, okay? And the only reason that you have people that come in from Kentucky and Tennessee is because they had nowhere to go. They were desperate for land. They were bankrupt. So they come over here. And that's how they're able to do those things. That's why they're able to thrive. In Mexico City, or if you go to Guadalajara, or you go, below Saltillo, way below Saltillo, Jalisco, those areas, you've got a temperate climate. You got jungle canopies that are going to protect you from the sun. You've got, land animals. You have, lake fauna. You have animals that live just in lakes, okay? I think it's lacustrine. I can't pronounce it. Lacustrine animals that live around the lake. Storks and garzas, cranes, all these things that they can consume. And they don't have to be out in the middle of nowhere like we are out here without air condition, trying to get a couple of lizards and it's horrible. Okay? Now, right around 8,000 years before Common Era is the first human experiments of cultivation. Okay? It's during the Pleistocene period. I can't pronounce anything today. And they start cultivation of squash. Later on, about 6,000 years before Common Era, they throw beans into the mixture. And, about 10,000 years ago, they go ahead and they start to cultivate corn, zea maize, which actually was the annual grass known as teosinte. It was a teeny little stalk like that. And through hybridization, not genetic modification, they're able to get a bigger ear of corn that still is only about 2.5 to 3 inches long, but nothing like we have now. It was actually, and they were able to survive with that because as long as the corn, the beans, and the squash are kept dry, they can store them and they last up to a year, 18 months. And that was, they were able to feed and allow their populations to grow and allow women to breastfeed for longer periods of time, thus creating more labor, thus creating bigger societies that thrived a lot more. And that was very important, okay? This was known as the Three Sisters or the Trinity of Sustenance, okay? They also had tomatoes. The tomato comes from Mexico, okay? The original tomato was like a cherry tomato, it was real tiny. They had peppers. The original pepper, believe it or not, was the chile tecpin or the chile piquin, the real little one. There's one in my yard. From that tomato and that pepper came all the tomatoes and all the peppers that we have in the world. They were hybridized and later on genetically modified to do that. We also had cacao, which was a actually when you look at the cacao pod, it looks kind of nasty when you open it up. It's nasty. They take it out and they take the seeds out and they roast them the way they do coffee, and it was even used as currency. It was actually worth more than money, more than gold. It was known as the elixir of the gods, and this is what Moctezuma gave Cortés when he arrived. I'm pretty sure La Abuelita was there with her cafe, no, I'm just kidding, Abuelita wasn't there, and it wasn't that kind of coffee anyway. It's actually kind of bitter. I've had the nibs, the real one, and it's pretty potent. It's like coffee, like black coffee, okay? They also had tobacco, but they wouldn't abuse of it. And they also had pulque, okay? But drunkenness was not tolerated in most of these societies, and if you got drunk, they would put you to death. It was it was that simple, right? It's like they wouldn't cut you, and he's like, "Oh, you got a DWI today," and it's like, "Okay, you're gonna get sacrificed tomorrow for being a drunk." Well, religion, as it is today in Mexico, religion was a dominant force in the lives of these people as it is to Mexicans now. I mean, they took their religion pretty serious. I mean, they were sacrificing people, weren't they? Um, it was not a Catholic religion, but they did pray to the sun, the moons, and the stars. They were able to track Venus closer than it's ever been tracked before. Uh, their primary concern was that the sun was going to rise the next day, and that was the main thing. Okay, they had a god, and we will discuss them later. They were not Abrahamic religion. They were not. They were based on the cosmos, the sun, the moon, the stars, nature, water, earth, etc. Every living thing was a manifestation of the supernatural, okay? Birth date synergism, like the Dia de tu Santo, El Dia de tu Animal, you can actually find that out. Um, every animal had its purpose, and every animal had its place in the Aztec or these calendars, and because of that, they were well cared for. Everything from the tapir to the I guess the poison frog or the jabalí or anything like that. Later on, when the Catholics came, they replaced that with um, saints, patron saints, el Día de tu Santo, los Santos. Okay, most of these gods, with the exception of the animal deities, had once been human. Okay, they're depicted as human in the stone reliefs, and then something happened to them, like in a Greek tragedy, and they died. Okay, Huitzilopochtli, his brother Tlaloc, Tzonatzin, all those they were at one time were living, and then at one time, they were dead, either because they had a Cain and Abel story, or they all have the same kind of run the same stories. Most of these had a trinity, the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. But most of these were matrilineal. While the main god was Huitzilopochtli, and he was a nice guy. Okay, he demanded blood. That's what fed the sun. Still, the female. They understood that without females, nothing was really going to exist. Okay, so one of the things that you will see that's so great about our culture is that these gods and god cults were transferable. Okay, they would replace each other. Okay, often with gaping jaws or great masks or monstrous figures. You know what I mean? I mean, Sonatzin replaces. The Sonatzin is replaced by La Virgen de Guadalupe. God the Father replaces Huitzilopochtli. Tlaloc is replaced by Christ. Those kind of things that happen. The Aztec did not have heaven. Most of these cultures had just hell, and we'll talk about that later on. Writing, they did not have an extensive writing system. Okay, uh, I mean, what I'm trying to say is that they did not have a cuneiform writing. They did not have those sticks, like that. They did not. They had the only place in the Americas where writing systems were invented and used were amongst the Cherokee. Okay, they had an alphabet, but others were very minimalist, and they were picture. Okay, a lot like the Egyptians, and it was a logophonic system, capable of recording speech and literature. Okay, recording speech is one thing, and recording literature is another. But you know, while they shared core features that made them different from other forms in the world, they were still very similar to pictographic writings that are found amongst the Egyptians and other tribes that use pictographic, writings. I'm not trying to berate them under any circumstance, okay? But they did not have, a form of writing as we know now, regardless of their language, okay? That's one of the. They did have, of course, they did have the speech for it. They would say, well, that is called Huitzilopochtli. We'll write it out. And it's like, well, I don't know how to spell it. Well, they couldn't spell it because they didn't have the alphabet to do it, but they could write him. It's like, oh, this dude. You know who Huitzilopochtli is? If you look at the guy at the very center of the Aztec calendar with his tongue out, that's Huitzilopochtli. Some people argue that it's Tlaloc, but I say it's Huitzilopochtli. I mean, why would Tlaloc be the rain god be in the center of the Aztec calendar? Okay? If I'm wrong, please let me know and send me the material where it says that I'm wrong. All right? Now, after conquest, the friars taught Mexican Indians how to translate their languages, primarily Nahuatl or Nahuatl. And, of course, this new facet gave a new rise to Mesoamerican ethno-history. They said, well, wait a minute, we have an alphabet. What is this called? Huitzilopochtli. Okay, well, let's phonetically spell that out, you know? And they did that. And then we come out with extra letters like the Aya and the Anya and, all of the above. So, but they weren't dumb. I mean, they were very, very complex mathematicians. They practiced bathing. They did not tolerate drunkenness. They understood medicine. They established the concept of the farmacia. As long as they would give you medicine as long as you reported back and said, hey, I feel better now. Or if you didn't come back, I guess you would die. But that's why even in Mexico now, everybody's able to go to the farmacia and you get a diagnosis there because that is left over from pre-Columbian times that everybody should be able to afford a level of medical care. It's like, yeah, bueno, yo tengo un catarro muy malo. And then you would go and you would say, oh, pues traes catarro. They check your temperature and all that, and then they give you a medicine and say, let me know how you do. Come back in 2 weeks whether you're good or not good so we can check you out again. Roman numeral number 6. We're going to talk about the Olmec first. And the Olmec are 1,400 to 400 years before Common Era. They thrive for about 1,000 years. Most of these civilizations go between 1,000 and 2,500 years. Nothing more than that. Well, and of course, it can't be more than that because that means that they would be at our doorstep. These were at 1,400 to 400 before Common Era, and then time starts. So we've only got 2,020 years there to work with, right? The Olmec were the earliest major Mexican civilization that we know of, that we really know of. and they followed a progressive urban development at Soconusco, okay, and Chantuto. These people really thrived between about 5,500 years before Common Era in the area of Chiapas. And as that civilization begins to decline, these others spread. So you would have like these big city states that would arise, like Soconusco or Chantuto, and then all of a sudden they would have some kind of famine or something would happen. There was a political problem, and they'd go from Chantuto to Soconusco, and then from Soconusco they would say, "Well, we don't want any of this. We're gonna go start. We're gonna go somewhere else to Cochilapa, and we're gonna start something there, or we're gonna go to Tlatilco and start something there, or Tres Zapotes, or Laguna de los Cerros, or San Lorenzo." So they lived in the formative period, which was 600 years before Common Era, was right before the Isthmus, right before you get the Yucatan, right below Mexico in the area of Oaxaca. Okay. Now, one of the things that they begin to do is that right around 1400 to 1200 years before Common Era, they really established themselves in the area of Tabasco, okay, in the modern area of Tabasco. And the Olmec arise, and Olmec means rubber people, and the reason they call them that is because they would cultivate latex rubber from the trees. They would also dip their shoes in latex, and they would use them as shoes, okay? They lived in the very swampy lowlands, in the volcanic highlands of the Bay of Campeche, which is right there, uh, uh, in the Gulf of Mexico before you get to Cancun or Quintana Roo. I'm sorry, I don't know why I keep saying Cancun. I should say Quintana Roo. Um, and they constructed the permanent settlements of San Lorenzo, Tenochtitlan, and later on we're going to see the name Tenochtitlan recycled again, La Venta, Tres Zapotes, y Laguna de los Cerros. Now, this is not what they were called back then. This is just what they call them once the Westerners came in, okay? And these were in the Olmec heartland, which bordered the area of the Gulf of Mexico, right at the curve before you get to Quintana Roo. There's a map that illustrates that. I'm not going to ask you where it is, but I am going to tell you. Now, at the Isthmus of Tehuantepec in Mexico, from the Pacific to the Atlantic, is a little over 100 miles wide. So, at the very bottom of Mexico, the area from the Atlantic to the Pacific is, I would say, about 150 miles wide, which is fairly narrow to connect, land masses. Later on, when we get to the Panama Canal, it's even narrower. A strip of land that is only 40 miles wide. San Lorenzo was the first Olmec center, trading center, established around 900 years before Common Era. At the time, the La Venta also rose to prominence. So these were fairly close to each other. I think they're maybe 20 miles from each other. I don't remember. I remember we drove from one to the other in one day. They're still there. And what begins to happen is that San Lorenzo is the first one that declines around 950. They both start at around 900, but around 950, possibly to an uprising between the rich and the poor and the aid of environmental causes. So you begin to see the declination of, you know, La Venta and San Lorenzo then declines. Now, when San Lorenzo declines, everybody just leaves. They either went to La Venta, La Venta or Tres Zapotes. But what happens is that when you see the declination of San Lorenzo, uh, what begins to happen is that La Venta then rises to prominence. things. And La Venta is a quintessential example of Olmec wealth, luxury, giant ornate pyramids, very labor intensive, serpentine blocks, serpents made out of basalt, large mosaic, pavements, deposits of jade, pottery, figurines, hematite mirrors. I mean, there was, when they build these things, like the colossal heads, and somebody is paying for these things to get done. There's a really wealthy guy that said, I'm really connected to the feathered serpent. I want you to make me two of them right here at the entrance of my palace. I mean, we take mirrors for granted now. I mean, only the really wealthy had stuff like mirrors. They would make them out of this iron ore called hematite, and they would smelt it and then polish it, and they'd able to see themselves. Those things just, they only belong to the wealthy. Jade was cut, and they would make a mask of wood, and then they would inlay the mask with jade. And then, of course, those that were really, really wealthy, they would have pottery figures made out of, pottery figures made in their own likeness. Okay, instead of pictures, these people had pottery figures made in their own likeness. Some of them have survived. One of the most famous one is the wrestler. We'll probably see it in a little bit. Now, we don't know the decline of La Venta. We know that between 400 before Common Era and 350, about 50% of the Olmec population leave, and then the other 50 just kind of se los comió la selva. The jungle ate them. But we believe that they were absorbed by other tribes, smaller tribes that lived in the area. We also think that maybe perhaps volcanic activity may have scared them to spread out. We're not sure. But they went north to Tres Zapotes, which was a flourishing city, but it didn't have the grandeur of La Venta. I mean, La Venta was like, Paris. It was like New York City. It was like, Mexico City and La Zona Rosa. It was a thriving, community that, oh, anybody that had anything going, that's where they were. Okay. Olmec art was the first Mesoamerican art to be defined in the Americas. It's when we find the art of the Olmecs, they say, okay, well, this is art. This is pre-Columbian art. Is the earliest art that we've ever come across, and it's still considered like that. I've been very fortunate to see some of these things in Mexico, and I've also been fortunate to see some of the things that people have stolen from Mexico and now have in museums here, and they should all give it back. Jade, clay, basalt, greenstone, hematite are hallmarks of Olmec art, okay? Whether they crushed them, ground them, put a substrate in them to solidify them and use them to paint with, or the jade was just like that. Clay in itself was not a luxury item, but they could emboss it with stuff. Okay, they do that. Human-like figurines that they made out of clay were very important. They also have animals. They also have human animals put together, and they divide, of course, humans into four classes, and we have figurines of all four classes and of gods and all of the above. So a lot of these individuals did do that. They actually put a lot of effort and importance into figurines. The colossal heads that you'll see some scattered about. You'll see some in downtown Mexico City around the Museum of Natural History, and they're made out of basalt. Basalt is a volcanic porous igneous rock. It's not too hard to carve, and they would carve these 10-foot tall heads. They call them colossal heads. They weighed an incredible amount of weight. They were thought to have been former rulers. Okay, there was also rectangular altars and thrones. Okay, which also resembled a lot of times crypts or tumbas, like that. And then, of course, you have freestanding sculptures like the twins from El Azul, or you'll have how can I say, just, a feathered serpent, or, a jaguar or whatever. And then you also have stelas, Stelae, una stela. And that was what they would do there, is that they would either cut a stela or a stele into the wall of a pyramid, or they would cut it somewhere else and then affix it to there. What places like SMU and a lot of these universities did is that they literally just went down to Mexico and Central America with these huge steam saws, and they would cut these out. And you go, and I've been to some of these places, pyramids, and they'll just be like a blank where they just went and took out a depiction of an emperor. And you can go see it you can see them at SMU at the De Goyer Library there. And of course, this was the raping and pillaging of Central and South America and North America. As I said before, all these items should be returned back to them. They said, well, we were taking them to preserve them. No, crap, you were stealing. And of course, the jade masks. On page 9, you'll see hollow figures, and the hollow figure of an Olmec hollow baby, and you'll also see a basalt head there with a very, very pronounced nose. That's why a lot of Mexicans believe that we have African blood enough, because of the pronounced nose and the very thick lips. Uh, I'm not going to argue for or against, and I'm not ashamed if I do have African blood in me, then so be it. Extensive trade networks that went as far north as Mexico City. Now remember, the Mexicans then would take the trade further up north, and it would continue on like that. They did something called bloodletting, uh, cutting, right? They would tie themselves, or hand or a genital, into with a string, and they would allow the blood to accumulate there, and then they would poke themselves with the bloodletting artifact, and that would give them a euphoric sensation. Okay, uh, that they do find skeletons of unborn and newborn infants have been found. Whether or not sacrifice of infants was done, we don't know. These could have been, infants and children that had died when they were born. We really don't know that. It is believed that they came up with a concept of zero, as seen in Mesoamerica. Then the Maya take it, they really run with it. They come up with a concept of 20, but they come up with the concept of zero. And zero is ever powerful. It isn't worth anything, but without zeros, we are nothing, right? You can have $2,000, or $2, or you can have $2 million, all because of the zeros. Even though they don't carry any weight by themselves. If you put them together and then put a number in front or behind them, they're worth something, aren't they? Really cool. I don't like math. Okay. No religious evidence was left behind. Very little was left behind of the Olmec. Okay. We suspect that the rulers were the most important religious figures, and that's really it. Other than that, there's not a lot. I think the most important thing that they're famous for is their settlements and their art. Okay, Carlos Rovello will probably spend a long time talking about the Olmec, and they really entrenched what Mexican art would be till today. Okay, until today. I firmly believe that. Now we're going to talk about the Maya. And by the way, Maya singular and Maya is plural. Or Mayan culture, but there's no such thing as Mayas. Okay? No, you don't do that. It's irritating. The Maya flourished about 2000 before Common Era. They kind of overlapped the Olmec. They were flourishing in another location. The Olmec are 1400 to 400 before Common Era. So it is possible that some of the Olmec were absorbed by the Maya. And they actually go until 1697 Common Era. So that's 2,000, 3,697 years that they flourished. And they actually have different periods. They have the pre-classic, the classic, and then they're going to be the post classic, which is once they're done, right? They With them we see the cultivation of maize, squash, beans, the development of writing, and the construction of large temples with stucco facades. That means that the temple was probably made of a lesser grade of stone, and they would then put nicer stone around it. Around 2000 before Common Era, or before Common Era. 250 Common Era, I'm sorry. Forget these numbers. We see the development of cities like Tikal, uh, Cala, Calakmul, in the Petén Basin, which rival Tenochtitlan. Okay, these are going to be cities that are going to be as they're going to thrive as much as Mexico City, and this is going to be in Yucatan and in Quintana Roo. Okay, remember the people of Yucatan and the people of Quintana Roo, right at the isthmus. They really don't have a they really don't like the idea of being Mexican. They want to be their own country. They want Yucatan to be their own country. They don't want to be part of Mexico. Their period of existence is broken up into three: the pre-classic, the classic, and the post-classic. And the classic is from 250 Common Era to 900 Common Era, and then from 900 to 1697 Common Era is a post-classic. The pre-classic, well, in the pre-classic, the Maya are still in their infant stage. It is when they get to 250 Common Era that they start going into the classic period, and this is because of the building of the temples, and the it just the civilization begins to explode. Okay, the Maya as we know it. Okay, during this period, you begin to see construction and urbanism occur. They actually planned it out. It's also the peak of intellectual and artistic development. That's not to say that after that they just died. No, that's not so. It was the peak of artistic development. Um, Cities numbered anywhere between 1,500 to 120,000, and were linked through a network of cities and suburbs. Okay, so it'd be kind of like here. It'd be like Fort Worth is connected to Forest Hill. Forest Hill is connected to Kennedale. Kennedale is connected to Mansfield, and like that. And then you have a spot, and then you have a little bit of space, and then Burleson. That's the way it was. But the center would be like downtown Fort Worth. That's where everything happened. Now they are going to be influenced by Teotihuacan, and it, even the Teotihuacaneses intervene in the, the the deposing of a ruler in Tikal in 378 Common Era. But this is going to cost the Maya when they do that. They say, hey, we're having a bunch of trouble here. We need some help, and they have people from Teotihuacan come over. And when they come over, they say, well, we're going to go ahead and do this, but you're gonna have to let one of your daughters marry my son, and we're gonna have to cement this, and that's going to allow for the decline of the Maya. Okay, this lecture is going to be a long one. It's going to be an hour long lecture, so I don't apologize for that. By the ninth century, by 900 Common Era, we begin to see a decline. We begin to see political collapse and mass abandonment of the cities. A lot of people feel that this happened because uh, people were just tired. They were ending the dynasties. Uh, there is no accepted answer. There's only theories. One of the things that we suspect, when I started school, I was always told that the Maya were very docile and that they were a very likable, peaceful people. But in reality, uh, I later on found out through lectures and studies and all of the above that they weren't. They were incredibly They were incredibly vicious. If you see the movie Apocalipto, that those are Maya. They did not have a big stature, but they practiced bloodletting. They practiced sacrifice. They would prey on lower tribes. They would sharpen their teeth. I mean, these were the warrior class was wicked, absolutely, and you can see how scary they are in the movie Apocalipto. They also sacrificed humans to Kukulkan. Kukulkan! They would go like that. If you watch some of these clips on Apocalipto, I recommend that you do. But I think, I think a combination of overpopulation, depletion of foods, and a drought, that's what did it. And then you use a model of ruleship where you have a bunch of rulers that are not taking care of a people and they're executing them, and then no, wait a minute, there's too many of us, so we're just gonna storm the palace, and that's it, of course. But uh, while you see this happen in at the bulk of the classic period of the Maya, in Tikal, what you will see in Chichen or Chichen Itza or Uxmal, that they're still doing okay, but they're not as, I guess, as mean. I guess they're more laid back. I don't know what to tell you, and we can sit here for hours and discuss what happened to these civilizations, and we'll never find out. They just I think they were just absorbed by others, and people just got tired of that. We've been putting up with you people for, 700 years and you're still at the same thing. No, no, we're done. We're not going to do this anymore. My parents were stupid, but I'm not. The collapse in the post classic period between 950 and 1539, that's when, at contact, and then by 1697, they're absorbed into society. And I'm gonna cut it off at the Maya. Okay, uh, major cities like Chichen Itza and Puc and in Guatemala were abandoned. Okay, remember the Maya were like they went from the isthmus, they went all the way down to Guatemala. Okay, uh, they moved and they concentrated in the rivers along the Atlantic and Pacific coast. So they kind of move out to the beaches. If you have cities like Mayapan that does continue to thrive until 1448, but no, in 1511, a caravel is wrecked in the Caribbean and 12 survivors make it to Yucatan. So by 1511, uh, you have Europeans come. Most of them were sacrificed to escape, and they survive. And they actually begin to cohabitate with the Maya. Okay, so as early as 1511, and these people cohabitated, then you're gonna have the rise of mestizaje. Okay, the final conquest of the Maya, of course, happens in 1546. There was a few sparse kingdoms left. The last kingdom is Noipeten, and it falls in 1697. To the Spanish and disease, right? And of course, a lot of these other tribes didn't like the fact that the Maya were preying on them, so they helped the Spanish conquer them. Okay, the Maya, regardless to this day, they still use their 260-day calendar. Millions of people in Mexico speak Maya or Nahuatl. Okay, politics, unlike the Inca and the Aztec, the Maya were never integrated into one political system. It was composed of chiefdoms, and they were all each rivalry tried to put one into submission, and they had vassalage and alliances and theopolitical rulers through marriage arrangements. Okay, that means that there was one badass dude that beat the crap out of all the others, and of course, when he got weak, then they would. So it's very much like Japanese feudalism. Okay, that could be another reason why they declined. Because they were just todo el tiempo querían pelear. They always wanted to fight. Andaban enojados todo el tiempo. They were they did have a divine king. That individual would become the divine king, and he ruled over administrative, economic, military, judicial, religious, and political realms of his kingdom. Outlying chiefdoms paid him tribute, and that's how he got wealthy. And he would then, when he would collect the tribute, then he would redistribute it to the people. Very, very complex society, sectors of occupations. However, it appears that there was a middle class among the Maya, and different levels of priests and noblemen. Okay, so that means that there was poor nobles, rich nobles, there were poor priests, there was wealthy priests, and either way, I hate to break it to you, 90% of the population of the Maya were common people like you and me. So on 10% ran the whole show, right? And 90% did all the work, okay? I guess it's worse now because they say 85% of the wealth is controlled by 15% of the population. No, I guess it was better. It's better now than it was then. Mathematics, they used mathematics, the base of 20, the decimal system, and they use a bar counting system with dots and bars. Zero was a little circle that looked like a little loaf of bread. One was one dot. Two was two dots. Five was a line. Six was the line and the dot. 10 was two lines. 15 was three lines. 19 was three lines, four dots. And then you went on to, I think it was, how was 20? I forgot. Oh my God, it had its own figure and I didn't put it here. I apologize, okay? It couldn't be three, four dot, and then one. And it wouldn't be five. Would it be five lines? Five lines and a loaf of bread. That would give you 20, I guess. I forgot. It's late and I forget these things, right? I want to finish up the last. Astronomy, they made meticulous observations of celestial bodies, recorded their movements, the sun, the moon, the stars, Venus. They tracked Venus with an error of 2. Okay? 2. Humans, the best they've ever been able to do is 4. They launched warfare based on the Venus cycle. Okay, solar eclipses were dangerous events. They never thought that the shadow of the Earth was devouring the sun, or the god was devouring the sun. Sacrifices happen. They figured the more we sacrifice, hey, they're gonna give us the sun back, and that's can you imagine being the guy that gets sacrificed just seconds before the sun comes back? Man. So, if you have a chance, I may put the sacrifice scene of Apocalypto on for you all to watch. They were very, very violent and brutal people. And I really think that it was a combination of drought and all the above that made these individuals say, Sakate, we're not going to give you anything anymore. Anyway, this concludes my lecture, and I will start with another lecture. Maybe I'll do it tomorrow. I seem to do better at night. I still have the Teotihuacan, I have the Mixtec and the Aztec to cover. And then from there, we will go right into, of course, Europeans. I hope that's not it for Unit 1, but maybe it is for Unit 1, okay? So, yeah, that will be it for Unit 1. So, I'll just give you a small quiz. It won't be anything big. You know me, I'm pretty laid back. Again, the views expressed in this lecture are my views and my views alone, and not those of Tarrant County College South Campus. In addition to that, I would like for you all to if you like the lecture, and recommend it to other people if you think it's a lecture they could follow or they would learn something from. I do not have any problem with you watching my lecture or using my lecture. No, I don't. I don't make any money off of it. And I want you to be kind to each other and to wear your masks, okay? Until next time, you all take care. Goodbye.